Hi everyone, Holly here. I've decided to start a new playlist here on YouTube because I want to share some of the books, some of the other teachers and authors and gurus that have helped me in my spiritual awakening and in my spiritual growth. So this is the first of those. And I want to share with you the works of Florence Scovel Shinn, and particularly her book called The Power of the Spoken Word. So we're starting this book review, this book exploration videos here with this very first book, an early book, an older book, and one that was very, very impactful to me early on in my spiritual growth. So welcome to this new series. Now, this particular book, Power of the Spoken Word, it's not a big book. It's about 95 pages. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote it in 1945. She was 73 years old at the time. So she had already done a lot of work. She did a lot of lecturing, a lot of other writing about spiritual things, spiritual content, and spiritual concepts. Both Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, and then Louise Hay's, who we all know, Hay House, and Louise Hay's work, they both state that they were influenced by Florence. So she was a big influence in their life too. So back in the 1920s, she had a big following, lots of public lectures on spirituality. Her first book, The Game of Life and How to Play It, was kind of her first big foray into publishing books. And this particular one that I'm talking about in this video, Power of the Spoken Word, she wrote very late in her life. And so it's kind of a culmination, a summation of all the things she would share in her lectures and in all of her earlier work, all of her earlier books. So it's kind of a really good compilation, a census of everything that she brought to us. So this particular book, it's focused on spirituality, and particularly, I think, one of my big takeaways from it is kind of an interpretation or reinterpretation of Jesus's words from the New Testament. There's a whole lot of quotes from the New Testament in this book and her interpretation of that. And it's not the typical Christian interpretation. It's not what churches are teaching right now. It's a much more, it kind of links Christian theology and the law of attraction. And she was doing this back in the 1920s, was making this connection. The law of attraction is right there in the Bible if you interpret what Jesus told us correctly. And so Florence, she puts all of that together very clearly in this book, Power of the Spoken Word. So she's bringing in a lot of these New Testament quotations from Jesus's words and unpacking them to help us understand, and it reinforces greatly the law of attraction. So I want to share with you some of my favorite quotes from this book and kind of what they mean for me. And hopefully what I'm really doing with this video is inspiring you to go out and get this work. You can actually read it for free online. You don't even have to buy it. It's out there available for free. So please go read this book, Power of the Spoken Word by Florence Scovel Shinn. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes, I've got a few here I'll be sharing, but one of them is, "The first start towards success is to be glad you are yourself." That's a direct quote from Florence in the book. The first start towards success is to be glad you are yourself. And I interpret this to kind of mean the importance of gratitude. If we're not even capable, if we don't even have the capacity to receive gifts, to be grateful for the gifts we've received, we're probably not going to get more gifts, okay? And even if they're 2 inches from our nose, we're not going to recognize them. So being in this state of gratitude is so important. And if you can't be grateful for the very first gift that you ever received, the gift of life, then how are you going to appreciate any other gifts? So the first start towards success is to be glad you are yourself. Be grateful that you are you. Have gratitude and just knowing that you have been given the gift of being here, of you being you. Words of wisdom. Next quote is, fear is man's only adversary. Okay, so let's talk about this one. Fear is man's only adversary. You know, I learned many years ago that I can't remember if it's Hebrew or Aramaic, but the word that has been translated into English as the devil, in those more ancient languages, the word is actually adversary. A more accurate word would be adversary. And that's really all evil is. It's just our adversary. It's what challenges us. It's what competes against us in our life and in our spiritual growth. And adversaries can actually be helpful. They can actually help us grow. I mean, you think about a sports team, and you want capable and great adversaries. Having capable adversaries, having challenging adversaries helps you grow. And so fear is man's only adversary. Help me to understand that we can actually use fear to our benefit. If I study my fear, it helps me to grow spiritually. It's my only adversary. And if I understand that adversary, then I can compete against that adversary. The next quote from Florence. And this is actually a Bible quote from Jesus. If thine eyes be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. If thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. And what this tells me is that what you're focused on can bring light into your life. And this goes back to, well, what are you focused on? Do you have a purpose? Are you singularly focused on that purpose? And so having that purpose and being in your life, being aligned to that purpose is what brings light into the world. It doesn't matter what the purpose is. The purpose can be as simple as being. It can be to be of service. It can be to bring love. It can be an experience. It can be a relationship. But being singularly focused on that purpose is what brings light into the world. Next nugget from this book. God is the supreme intelligence within each one of us, and we are the channels for it to express itself. God is the supreme intelligence within each one of us, and we are the channels for it to express itself. I love this language. It gets us away from this God as He, God as Father, this anthropomorphizing of something as great and grand as the concept of God. That always bothered me, even as a young child. I'm like, God's so much bigger than a human body, than a human image, so much bigger. And it also gets us back to this concept of we are the channels for it to express itself. So living in this way where we're an empty vessel, we're just allowing the universe to flow through us. We're just allowing the supreme intelligence to flow through us. And the more we empty ourselves as an empty vessel in service to that universal energy, to that supreme intelligence, the better off we are. Love that one. Also, comparable to this is another quote out of the book. Everything comes through you, not to you. Everything comes through you, not to you. It's more this being an empty vessel. Let God, let the universe flow through you. You don't have to figure it all out. All you have to do is be available and be open and be allowing to have God flow through you. Love that. All right. Couple more from Florence. The unbeliever is a resenter, a resistor, or a regretter. The unbeliever is a resenter, a resistor, or a regretter. So these negative states, this state of resistance, the state of regret, the state of resentment, these negative affects, these negative emotions are proof of unbelief. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I've had people who claim to be faithful in their life, claim to be connected spiritually, and yet they're full of fear and hatred and resentment and regret. Those things aren't faith. Those things are proof that you actually don't have faith. If you're resenting, you're not walking God's path. You're not walking God's plan. If you're resentful about what has happened, if you regret what has happened, because everything is perfectly aligned to exactly what was supposed to happen. That's the point of faith. We might not understand it in our little human brains. We might not get it, but everything has happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. So having any sort of resentment or regret is proof of unbelief. Okay, a couple more. When all fear is obliterated, we live magical lives. Florence tells us, when all fear is obliterated, we live magical lives. Oh, yeah. That's the end game, to release all fear. So we come into this human experience. We come in, we've chosen to incarnate as a human, which meant that we were going to have an ego self. And the language of the ego self is fear. So here, as an eternal, beautiful, peaceful soul, we've chosen this very challenging incarnation to be a human with a language of fear, to forget reality, to experience separation, and to rise above all of that. That's it. That's the point. That's the final exam, right? That's the purpose of having this challenging experience, is to rise above it, which means rising above the fear, releasing the fear. It's the yoga of all yogas, to have this human experience where we're imbued with fear, and yet once we obliterate it, we can have that awakening. We can have that very different experience in this human. All right, last quote from Florence that I want to share with you. The only way to get rid of fear is to transmute it into faith. It's an integral part of our human experience. Human beings are programmed with fear. That's the language of the ego self. We're very vulnerable, very squishy and juicy creatures with a lot of things to be legitimately afraid of in this incarnation. It's important to our experience to have fear. And our spiritual awakening and awareness is how we return to peace, and it's about understanding that we're programmed with fear, and yet we can transmute it. We can transmute it into faith. That's the point of all of it. It kind of sums up the meaning of life. The only way to get rid of fear is to transmute it into faith. That's our job here. That's the purpose of the human incarnation, is to come to a place that's full of fear and then to transmute that fear into faith. Faith in the universe, faith in the supreme intelligence, faith in God, faith in the plan, faith in the guides, faith in reality that's beyond this particular human experience. So, some words of wisdom from Florence Scovel Shinn in the book Power of the Spoken Word. Tiny little book, easy read, but oh my gosh, you can spend years studying her few words and these beautiful wisdom that tried to come here through Jesus, but it kind of got warped in the process. And she brings us back to those words of Jesus and those words of wisdom. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the whole journey as we talk about lots of different books that have had a huge impact on me.